On this edition of the program, it's tariff time. We talk about Trump's poll numbers with the great Bill Scher and the debut of Katie Harbath to the program. We talk all things technology and social media when it comes to politics. It's a delight. You're going to want to hear it. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for March 5th, 2025, my birthday. Your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you here from Austin, Texas. And just so you know, in case, I don't know when you're listening to this, if you're listening to this on your commute, we're going to try and get this one out as soon as possible because we have to make the call on whether or not we're going to wait for the fake State of the Union or we're just going to get this out to you guys and we'll cover the fake State of the Union on our Thursday show. So we are going to cover it on our Thursday show. But as often happens with these kinds of things, which is why I tend to not wait for them, you kind of know the big moments that are coming before they happen. And before we get to talking about Bill Scher and Donald Trump's poll numbers and his economic downside and where Democrats need to go, especially when it comes to a shutdown. And before we get to Katie Harbath, who has a scintillating debut on the PX3 program, listeners will know, viewers will know, when I have that little part of my brain scratched when it comes to political trivia, you can tell, oh boy, when we get into campaign by campaign of 2003, 2004, 2005 political arcania, Katie Harbath was working on some of those campaigns. Oh boy, it's a treat. You're going to want to stay till the end for that. And we're going to talk about tariffs, which went in today for Canada and Mexico. I got a lot to say about that. But here's the breaking news as I record. We put out for everybody on Monday my thoughts on what happened at the Oval Office on Friday between Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance specifically. I made my opinion clear. Some of y'all appreciated it. Some of y'all did not. We got some comments. You know, looks like the bootlicking lessons are going well. So granted, whenever you step into the breach on this, you got to inspect some incoming. But the reason why I said what I said was because at the end of the day, I think that this deal is going to get signed because none of the underlying facts on the ground have changed. Ukraine still needs the United States. Europe needs the United States. Without the U.S., nothing goes. And so that's why I was, critical of Zelensky. Because whether or not you feel sympathetic to the man, and I think many do, I do feel sympathetic to the man, or you thought that this was something that felt orchestrated, the deal was the deal, and the deal's not getting better. To put it in the parlance of the American president, he doesn't hold the cards. And so, as I am recording this on Tuesday in the afternoon, Zelensky signed the mineral deal. And according to Reuters, it's going to be announced during this State of the Union-esque, not technically State of the Union, despite the fact that it looks identical to a State of the Union, addressed by Trump tonight to both houses of Congress. this is a big deal. I think it's a good deal. I think it is a deal that the European continent wanted. I think it is a deal that America obviously wanted, and it's a deal that Ukraine needs, quite frankly. They need that deal. This happened after more escalation from what we covered on Monday. Zelensky told an assembly of Ukrainian journalists that the war was very, very, very far from ending. He walked that back pretty quick. And then Donald Trump responded by halting the transmission of aid to Ukraine. Well, that's going to tighten things up real quick. And that's exactly what happened. There was a very conciliatory tweet from Zelensky on Tuesday. And then, in the words of Spaceballs, they did the short version. They didn't send a delegation out to Kyiv. They didn't send a delegation out to Munich. They did not welcome Zelensky into the White House. No, dog. You get a DocuSign. Just go ahead and drag that signature down to the bottom. Bada bing, bang, boom. Obviously, we will cover how Donald Trump talks about this or if there's any change to the facts on the ground. But that's where we are right now. Bringing us to the other gigantic news of the day. And that is the United States putting broad tariffs on two of our biggest trading partners, Canada and Mexico. And so, as I often do, I wanted to go back in time and just understand how we got here. So obviously, during Donald Trump's first term, he was not immune from the charms of tariffs. And some of them, like the ones he put on China, have actually just been left in. They were not touched by the Biden administration. But he did more of a delicate dance with Canada and Mexico. Initially, saying that there was going to be a 5% tariff on specific industries like lumber, steel, and aluminum. There was a big question about automotive production. And then they wind up doing a new NAFTA, and everything kind of calms down. And that was calm for the rest of Trump 1. But in the intervening 4 years with old Donnie Trump on the bench, he apparently felt that there was still an imbalance with Canada and Mexico that needed to be rectified. And so on the campaign trail and at the beginning of this term, he made mention that there needed to be a correction of trade imbalance. Now, I don't really remember him talking about Canada all that much, but apparently he did. I just don't, he did not make it the kind of focal point that he has here. So, here's how all this goes down. On January 20th, on Inauguration Day, President Trump signed an executive order initiating a review of the USMCA. That was his new NAFTA. The order launched a study on how the trade pact has affected U.S. industries, with findings due by April. Well, we didn't really wait all that long, because on February 1st, Trump said that he was going to sign 2 sweeping executive orders, and indeed he did, imposing tariffs on virtually all imports from Canada and Mexico. Under these orders, Canadian goods face a 25% tariff with a somewhat lower 10% tariff on energy exports, including oil and gas, and all Mexican imports are hit with a flat 25% tariff. Now, initially, these did not go into effect. Some furious negotiating between all the world leaders led to a 30-day stalling of implementation. And you would be part and parcel with me if you believe that that 30 days would just kind of come and go and everybody would forget about this. But 30 days on, we see what happened on Tuesday, which was the full implementation. Now, Canada and Mexico together account for about $1.3 trillion of annual trade with the United States. To do it, President Trump had to invoke the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, typically used for sanction, to justify U.S. national security. And so that's part of the reason why you hear Trump talking so much about fentanyl, is because he needs that to justify the executive powers to put this in. It's the same reason why he needed a disease to justify some of the border restrictions that were put in there because of COVID. Now they're reinstated because they can find another disease to do it. Of course, the reaction to this has been swift and very, very angry. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau condemned the tariffs, calling them absolutely unacceptable, and unveiled a $30 billion retaliatory tariff package. For the record, we might need to bring on a scrim again. I don't know if I'll be able to afford them now with the increase in tariffs on Canadian podcast guests. But I wonder if this had happened earlier. Like right now, Donald Trump is probably the most reviled man in Canada, and Trudeau has been a stalwart in standing up to him. I would wonder whether or not Trudeau would have been able to save his political career if this had happened in a different order. The first round of Canadian targets on U.S. exports include steel, aluminum, appliances, food products, including orange juice, wine, and ketchup, motorcycles, and other goods. Canada says they are mapping out a second wave of $125 billion in duties following 21 days if this dispute is not resolved. Several Canadian provinces announced that they are banning or boycotting U.S. products, including pulling American wines, beers, and liquors off store shelves. As for Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum also issued a sharp protest, but has not yet, as of press time, announced immediate retaliation. But by the way, even before now, Trump had continued to increase tariff pressure on these countries. He had a 25% on all steel and aluminum imports, and then eliminated the exemptions that were put in by his own new NAFTA free trade agreement. He also expanded the 2018 steel and aluminum tariffs, and he hiked the duty on imported aluminum from 10% to 25% in all countries. And then, of course, today it all happens. And this happens after Trump says both Canada and Mexico failed to, quote unquote, do enough to avoid it, specifically when it comes to fentanyl and illegal immigration. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said publicly that this is a very dumb thing to do. Meanwhile, in Mexico, there are mass protests scheduled to show their displeasure at all of this. Now, the reaction internally has been bad. The stock market is down. Every economist that can get on television or talk to a newspaper reporter explains that this is going to be terrible, that this will raise prices, that this will be inflationary. And if Donald Trump in part got elected to the White House because he was able to convince the American public that he was the answer to inflation, then driving it up for different reasons might not achieve his goals. CEOs for major retailers like Target and Best Buy have both said that the consumer will see higher prices on imported goods from either of those two nations. The businesses are not going to eat the cost. They are going to pass it on to you, the consumer. So what is affected by this? The automotive industry is going to see a big price hike. Steel and aluminum is going to see a big price hike. Energy, including Canadian oil, natural gas, and energy resources, are going to see a 10% price hike. Agriculture and food, that comes a lot from Mexico. Fruits and vegetables, Canada's initial tariff list coming into their country, obviously going to include orange juice, coffee, and dairy. Household appliances, electronics, and clothing. Industrial machinery and manufacturing, and on and on and on the list goes. It is very important to note that Mexico is our largest trading partner. They passed China during the COVID crisis. And Mexico vows that they are going to try to hurt American industries that export in to Mexico, up to and including soybeans, pork, and beef. So, amongst all the noise, I want to offer one little piece of clarity that came to me while researching this. And it might make sense a little bit more when you rattle it in the old noggin of the 47th President of the United States. And that is this. These decisions may well put America into a recession. It may well shred the stock market for a little bit. It may well hurt our domestic industries that rely on exporting to those two countries. And whatever damage that you believe it will do for us, you can exponentially understand that it will hurt Mexico and Canada. How much? The United States buys 75% of all Canadian exports. 75%. The vast majority of everything that leaves Canada comes to the United States, and we buy it. And it's bigger in Mexico, where 80% of their exports are purchased by United States companies and citizens. Economists estimate that the moves could take several percentage points off Mexico's export earnings and slow its GDP growth down considerably, possibly tipping Mexico into a recession. It would be the same with Canada. And this gets into where I want to wrap up. I believe that these tariffs are the biggest bet the Trump administration is going to make. This is the biggest pile of chips that they are pushing in to the center of the table. I have quite possibly have been guilty of believing that the tariffs were only ever leverage for Trump. He didn't really want to do them. And that every time he talked about, well, tariffs are an amazing thing. The most beautiful word in the English language is tariffs, yada, yada, yada. That it was mostly because he understood that in any negotiation, he can generate leverage out of thin air. But now they're here. And even if we understand that America will be able to weather a trade war with Mexico and Canada far easier than they can weather a trade war with us, you have to wonder, what does Trump want? What would make him pull back on this? What is a framework for a new NAFTA that he would sign? Or is this what he does want? He does want for America to go into a mild recession and for Canada and Mexico to go into a fairly severe recession. I have no idea. I just know that right now, every economist that I trust and respect, or people that are literate in this topic, believe that these are absolutely disastrous for the end consumer. And that usually, if you are taking proactive steps to make things more expensive, you wind up hurting your party and your administration. Or maybe there is a gigantic miasma of the economy that is something that is outside of the pointy-headed purview of these boffins, and it is indeed Big Chungus, who understands that a strong American dollar and a strong American manufacturing sector and a strong American energy sector will be able to make up for any kind of inflationary difference, and ultimately the job gains and the industry strengthening will be something that all of the American voters will eventually say, thank God we took these steps to get us out from under the yoke of those flappy-headed Canadians and those rascally Mexicans. I would tend to bet on the economists, which is why I've always thought that this is some kind of negotiation tactic. But if Donald Trump is making our two greatest continental allies sweat, he certainly hasn't said out loud, aside from fentanyl and immigration stuff, what he wants. And mostly that's Mexico. It's not Canada. Why are we freaking out about Canada? What do we want from Canada? Now, obviously, we focus on American politics here, but there is something that is growing, and we're going to get to another story about this in the update, which is that while the Trump resistance is not quite the popular movement that it was in 2017, we've yet to see the kind of six-figure plus out in the street protests against Trump like we did then. Sometimes things take longer to go international. And opposition to Donald Trump has become very, very popular in Canada, in Mexico, and in Europe, where you've seen even politicians that have enjoyed Trump take shots at him. But still, it's going to hurt them more than it hurts us. The only question I continue to ask is, why? Here to talk to me more about Donald Trump, the state of the Democratic Party, and more is our old friend Bill Scher of Washington Monthly. We would like to welcome back to the show one of our favorites, Washington Monthly's Bill Scher. How you doing, buddy?
I'm as good as can be expected, considering, everything's burning all around us.
It certainly is a roller coaster. So I have two big things that I've been thinking over the last few weeks. I got to ask Bill about this. And one of them is about the unfolding Trump presidency, obviously. And you, from a certain perspective, I think have a very keen understanding of the vulnerabilities for Trump, both polling and otherwise. And there continues to be an in-public conversation about whether the Democratic Party, despite the fact that there is a very loud and controversial president, one that has been a panacea for Democratic ills in the past, at least when it comes to some of the approval ratings for the Democratic Party, things are not rebounding in the way that you might expect. Which one do you want to start? Which side of the coin are we talking about? The Democrats or Trump?
I think the Trump side's the more important one. So I would
then let's go.
There.
Let's go with Trump. He has the big joint session of Congress today. Obviously, we have a gigantic foreign policy situation that has unfolded before us over the weekend, then escalated since then with a stop of arms to Ukraine. And then the tariffs go in today. We look to be, at least as we record this on March 4th at 9:07 a.m. Central Time, in an unfolding trade war with Canada and Mexico. Obviously, these things have a tendency to turn on a dime. What is the biggest liability in your mind, the foreign policy or the economic?
Well, the economic, but I think they connect. I mean,
okay.
When to go to the Democratic side for a second, when you talk about the Democrats, they've gone too far to the left on transgender issues or immigration issues or being woke or whatever. I mean, a lot of that I always find very overblown, but when it has resonance, it's because people's day-to-day economic situations aren't satisfactory. And so you're vulnerable to the charge, you're focusing on Y when I want you focusing on
the
X.
wrong thing. You have your eyes on the wrong thing. The right thing is my pocketbook.
If my pocketbook was great, I don't care what you do with immigrants. I don't care what you do with transgender people. I'm fine. I mean, I think that's generally where your middle of the road swing voter is at.
Yes.
And if you say now, and you raise things that Trump is doing that are unsettling, and you often get a pushback. Well, Trump said he was going to do that. Trump said he was going to.
He campaigned on this.
Trump said he was going to, push for peace in Ukraine if that means Russia gets to take land. He said all this. Well, George W. Bush said he was going to privatize Social Security. He didn't use the word, but we all know what he meant. And then he came in saying, well, I got a mandate. I'm going to do it. And then you find out, like, maybe it's not why you want it. You said it.
Yeah.
But it's not really why people voted for you. And when you start with that and you get the pushback, you end up, getting boxed in. This is, the George W. Bush 2005 scenario times 10,000, because Trump is doing all sorts of things. This is a highly active president. Donald Trump is not a passive Calvin Coolidge type of libertarian president.
No.
He's doing things on all sorts of fronts, very disruptive, very radical, very proud of it, and none of it involves lowering the price of the cost of living. In fact, it goes in the exact opposite direction with tariffs. So, if
to the point where the messaging from Republicans, including Trump, is there might be pain. That this is they are saying that this is going to hurt, which is not usually what you want to do when you are a president or a party in power.
Look, if you're Donald Trump, you don't care. You can joke about running for a third term, but he's not getting on the ballot for a third term. I mean, unless the Supreme Court imposes martial law and forces a third term on us, in that sense, all is lost. But I think short of that, he's not running again, and he doesn't care about his legacy. He doesn't care about having high approval ratings. He doesn't care about the future of the Republican Party or passing the torch. He cares about being at the center of attention on a day-to-day basis on his term.
Yeah.
But if you're a Republican in Congress, you damn well care about the midterms. You damn well care about keeping your seat, or at least you should. I mean, maybe some of these folks don't care and say, hey, if I lose, I'll just get a lobbying job, or I'll get hired to the RNC, or Trump will send me to Malta or something. But if you do care about keeping your seat,
which Congress people normally do, historically,
you could tell yourself, it's a little bit of pain today, but it's going to pay off tomorrow. It's going to look good by 2026. I think that is highly delusional. There's nothing about what we know of Donald Trump to say this is a guy with a long-range vision and a deep understanding and care of the levers of government, and he really wants to make sure he hits his metrics. He really wants to make sure that everyone is working to their maximum productivity. That's not who Donald Trump is, and that's not who the people. I mean, to the extent that Donald Trump didn't completely destroy us, it's because some people hung around who did care about how government functions. Those people are not there now. Those are the people that he kicked to the curb to just have hardcore MAGA loyalists. So if you're a clear-eyed Republican, you should be saying to yourself, this is not going in a good direction. It's going down, and it's going to probably keep going down. And I know it's easy for me to say, create some distance between you and Trump, because I know you'll get skewered by Trump. I know you risk a primary challenge. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, but as a general election matter, 2026 is not going in a good direction for Republicans right now, and there's no reason to believe it's going to get better.
Yeah, I would say from their perspective, the question is, well, do I kill myself now or do I kill myself later? Right? Because if you split off and you blink from this, MAGA moment before you are able to pass the reconciliation bill or something like that, then you don't really have anything. You are just saying that you're off the boat. Now, your perspective is, hey, by 26, the people who jumped off the boat earliest are going to be looked at kindly. They will be looked at wiser than the people that didn't, that are diehards, right?
Well, I mean, if I was a Republican consultant, I might say,
what a world. What an amazing world. That would be Bill Scher, GOP consultant extraordinaire.
I would say, look, just keep your mouth shut for as long as you can, because I understand, getting out ahead of things too soon makes you a target. I get that. Yeah. But if you say a bunch of stuff that is nonsense and is going to look even stupider a year from now, you are going to get hammered. I mean, if you're going to be whining that Zelensky didn't wear a suit, that is nuts. If you're going to be saying that tariffs are going to work out in the end somehow, that this is a little bit of pain to benefit later, if there's no reason to actually believe that's true, just don't say it. Don't accept the CNN interview. Just lay low. Yeah. And wait for your moment to say, you know what, it didn't work out the way it was planned, and we need to make a pivot now because we tried it this way and it didn't work. Just wait for your moment to make that distance because, I mean, obviously it depends on what kind of seat you're in. But if you're in like a remotely vulnerable seat, I think you're gonna have to make that pivot at some point.
Yeah, because you're I mean, historically, the midterms will swing against the party that has the House, Senate, and White House, and I'm going to make my monologue at the beginning of this episode is basically that, like, this tariff thing, it's all the marbles for the Trump term, in my opinion. And it far outstrips what's happening in Ukraine, although obviously there's a lot of, consequential elements and very, very loud elements to a foreign policy decision like that. We're going to find out in the next year whether or not like the operating theory on free market economics is right, or whether or not Donald Trump has fundamentally remade the concept of the American economy. Now, I know where I would put my chips if there were a felt board of what is going to happen. I would bet that Donald Trump does not necessarily have a sense of this beyond what every economist who has worth his salt has said. But that's the bet. That's the bet to me right now. This is everything. This is all of it.
I mean, if Donald Trump was going to, first time around, first presidency, Trump made a lot of noise about tariffs, made a lot of noise about NAFTA.
Did put him on China, but
put him on China, and look, as did Biden. China is a difficult situation. They don't play nice in the trade war, so I do think that's a bit of a specific situation that you do want to. But I would argue you want to be surgical about it and not ham-fisted, which is now the Trump way. But the first time around, it was not as ham-fisted, and the NAFTA negotiations ended up producing a new agreement, which wasn't all that different from NAFTA. They slapped a new name on it, and Trump took a victory lap. So Trump does a lot of things at times that are more for show and end up not being as radical as advertised. And so if you think that Donald Trump's going to do hard tariffs today and he's going to ratchet them back down in a couple months' time and then declare victory because he reduced tariffs from other countries or something, I could see going along for the ride.
That's always been my operating theory. My operating theory was that he understands that the one leverage that he can conjure out of thin air, no matter what, is tariffs on your country. I did not think that they were going to get as far as they have with the Canada and Mexico. I have no idea where the Canada thing has even come from. Like the idea that Canada has become economic enemy number 1 or 2 next to Mexico is just I don't know. Talk about things that he ran on. He did not run on this. I watched a lot of Trump. I watched a lot of rally. I watched a lot of his verbiage on stuff. I mean, maybe at some point when somebody specifically asked him about Canada, he might say something like, well, we have a tremendous trade imbalance and we should correct it. But he certainly did not run on 25% tariffs to Canada.
Look, I literally met. I have a picket fence that's rotting. I got to replace the picket fence. I brought the local fence guy in, give me a quote, and I said, how fast do you think I have to move? Are your costs going to go up if there are tariffs slapped on Canada? And he was like, well, Trump threatened it before and he backed off, so I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think you got to worry. And and here we are. I mean, like, this is not just something that's abstract. People buy wood in America for things with their houses. And inflation was such a killer for Joe Biden because inflation affects everybody. This is going to affect everybody. If you think it's temporary, then again, I understand not wanting to get crosswise with Trump if you're a Republican. What Trump has been saying, I mean, it's always can be hard to distinguish, what's hyperbole and what's real. But he's been saying a lot from towards the end of the campaign through the first weeks of the presidency. That's not just about negotiating with specific countries. It's about changing the basis of revenue for America. That we should not be reliant on income taxes, and we should be reliant on tariffs. That's far more radical. I mean, also mathematically illiterate, but if he really believes it, that doesn't suggest something that's going to end in a couple months' time. He's looking for excuses to claim this is how America becomes wealthy. And it's bizarre. If you know anything about how government functions, it can be an interesting talking point if you don't know what you're talking about. And that's why Trump, I wrote this recently, a historian recently said Trump's the most skilled propagandist, of our times. Yeah, when he's not in power and his rhetoric doesn't have any consequences. When he's in power, and we saw this the first time around, it doesn't help him politically. He lost the House in 2018. He lost the presidency and the Senate in 2020. When the words have consequences and you're the one in charge, your propaganda skills are not as easy to scapegoat and blame shift. You're in power. That's the biggest for Republicans right now.
If you look at his approval ratings, and I'm trying to not do a super every single poll, created as gospel, because it seems like, he started off in the, at the high end in the mid 50s, more on the aggregate.
High end for him. High end for him.
For him, yeah.
Not high end historically
his average,
for
his
new
average.
presidents.
No, his average, right? Yeah. So his average was in like the mid 50s, more on the aggregate in the low 50s. Then it dipped into the high 40s, and now I've seen more of them that are in back in barely across the meridian line, which, as you point out, is low for every president except for Trump 1. But for Trump 1, it is high.
For an initial start of a term, for the honeymoon period.
Start of a term, for the honeymoon period, which I also just don't know what to do with comparisons like that, because I don't know if any president has ever been as defined as Donald Trump in the history of America. But anyway.
Well, look, Bill
let me finish my point before we get into the historical side of it.
Yep.
I don't know where the bottom falls out on it. I don't know where it goes if 50% of America is excited that he is moving at the speed that he is moving, and he is excited that he is breaking things. At what point does the adrenaline wear off and you're like, hey, can we stop breaking things? Can we stop making radical, I've never heard of this before, decisions, and get into the kind of ho-hum world of government, which I don't know if Trump is ever going to want to do. And that's where I would see the patience, even with the crowd, where we elected Donald Trump because we wanted big change. We wanted near revolutionary change. Aside from cat turd on X, where does the median voter say okay, all right, can we just get to where my tax rate's going to be next year?
Well, that's the one thing Republicans tend to do that people like is cutting taxes.
Yes.
I fully expect, I mean, I don't know how long it's going to take to get there. Your reconciliation bills are not as simple as they sound. And just for reminders, budget reconciliation is a process in Congress that allows to circumvent filibusters. It's the one way that you can pretty much pass a party line bill on a narrow vote. But what's in there has to be budget related, and so you can do tax stuff through that. That's how Donald Trump passed tax cuts in 2017. And that's how George W. Bush passed his tax cuts, in his first term. And in the case of Trump, he got that pass. It didn't help him. It actually did not help him politically. Still lost the House the year after. Democrats did a good job of saying this was really, helping the wealthy, not helping everybody else. But it, in theory, can deliver a check to people and make them feel good that Donald Trump did something for me. But if it's, I mean, there's two related catches with that. If you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, if you jacked up their cost of living with tariffs, and you're only kind of getting back to equilibrium with your tax cut, what have you really accomplished? I mean,
well, especially if it's not really going to change all that much, right? Like there's going to be an extension, if not a permanence. That's the fight between the House and the Senate on the tax cuts that have been in existence for the last 7 years. So they were the same tax cuts that existed for Biden's entire term that people were not happy about the economy.
It's got to be a net benefit to the voter for them to be happy about it.
They'll be happy that their taxes are not going up, but that's harder to make people
not
thrilled
good
about.
If you're jacking up their prices with tariffs and you're saying your taxes are status quo, like that's not a bonus. No. And if you go deeper and you give them really big tax cuts, say this is even better, then you're gonna save money after here's the tariffs. Guess what? That's how you get inflation. So if you bring too much money in people's pockets and then retailers jack up their prices in response, you're still treading water at best. It's not thought through. He does not have a team of macroeconomists who are trying to figure out how to make for a soft landing and a net benefit for people. It's just gut impulse. And again, if I'm a Republican who's got to think about how it's going to look in a year from now, I wouldn't feel good about it. But that is the one thing that is the potential for Trump to do that would actually benefit people. I just don't think it's being done in a very thoughtful way.
I mean, that seems like a consistent refrain from Bill Scher on the Trump presidency.
Well, yeah, I'm obviously vulnerable as coming from the left of looking at things through, my own filter and not being objective. But I have the experience of the first Trump presidency. We saw Trump burn himself by trying to repeal Obamacare, getting hosed, passing the tax cuts, and getting hit for that by saying this was corporate giveaways and you're making healthcare worse, and they lost the House. And the margin of the House now is even thinner than it was then. It will not take very much. I mean, even like a halfway decent Trump presidency, you'd probably expect Democrats to take the House, let alone one that's
historically you would. I mean, well, I'll put it this way, and this maybe would be a good segue into our Democratic conversation.
Yeah.
If the Democrats don't take the House, it's a 5-alarm fire.
Oh my God! I mean, that'd be utter humiliation.
That is a very, very long dark night of the soul if you are going into a general election where you were not able to take the House back, because the Senate is going to be a challenge based on the map.
The Senate's a high bar for Democrats. But if they can't take back the House, go out of business. I mean, like they should be able to pick up, I think it was 3 seats.
Yes.
Like even a good president would give up 3 seats.
I think it would be 5, right? It's 3 now because we don't have the
vacancies,
Stefanik seats or the Florida seats. But
right,
the only thing that I would say about the House that is different than the historical precedent is we are so tightly gerrymandered now in almost all 50 states that it's like I think we might be entering a world where like the era of the 35 seat majority is just kind of gone for now.
Yeah,
until
we're in a narrower band right now.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
But it still swings. We have had changes of power a lot in the past 20 years. It's just not going to be as wide a swing as we saw in the 80s or 90s.
Yeah. All right. So let's take a look at the Democratic side. What do you make of this? There's almost like twice a month a new powwow with a new group of groups and donors and consultants, and they all run to Politico and they talk about what they believe the future of the Democratic Party is. You have a lot of, in my mind, spaghetti being thrown up against the wall. Do people want angrier? Do people want calmer? Do they want a let's wait for Donald Trump to dig his own grave? Does the Democrats want to shut down the government, which is something that I can't remember being seriously talked about in my lifetime? What do you make of all this?
Well, maybe we should focus on the shutdown part, because that, to me, if nothing else, I think it's more interesting, because it's easy. It's easy to say Democrats should just resist everything.
Yes,
which is a viewpoint that I generally agree with. So bring in some other issue here. There was a Politico article a few weeks back where David Axelrod and Rahm Emanuel were saying, "Hey, Democrats, don't get so uptight about Trump going after USAID. Foreign aid is not popular, so that's not a hill to die on." And I thought that was sort of classically myopic, cramped political consultant advice. I don't care that in a vacuum it doesn't necessarily poll well. In fact, we've actually seen polls more recently that says it actually is quite unpopular, the gutting of USAID, because we've had more media coverage about what that means. So the polling for foreign aid a year ago is irrelevant. You've now got story after story about how children in Africa are going to die because of these cuts. Guess what? That might move public opinion. So you got to be not so tethered to stale poll data and use some common sense and say you can make an argument how this is bad and move poll numbers. So I think Democrats have reason not to be knee jerk, but to be able to use their own common sense and say, this is bad. I can explain why it's bad and persuade people to do that. So
I would agree. And I do think that their problem was they went after it when USAID was it was just USAID. We need to defend USAID as opposed to we need to defend why there's fruit rotting in a port in Houston and it's not getting out. It's already paid for. Why doesn't it go out to the place where it needs to go out? Or there are kids that are dying in Africa or whatever those causes are what you need to go out and do big press conference about.
But you need the anecdotes. You need the reporting to get there.
But instead we got everybody in the Democratic House and Senate outside of USAID when the number one thing that people knew about it were the caricatured examples of the
condom thing and whatnot, all the fun
the things that normally whenever Rand Paul goes off on his list of government expenditures that are patently ridiculous. They're USAID things.
But this is why you can't be so poll dependent, and you have to know the issue well enough to be able to think two steps ahead. If you know that the Rand Paul stuff is BS, and you can have a pretty good confidence. You know what? In 7 days' time, this cut's going to look really bad.
Yeah,
it's not a danger to get out in front of it. Protest in front of the building, plant your flag, and wait for the anecdotes to come, and then further build your case. So I don't second guess the Democratic handling of stuff like that. But now you get to the shutdown dilemma.
Yes.
And this is where it's not so simple to just say, just resist, or to just say the Republicans are in charge. It's all on their shoulders.
Do something.
Right. Just do something. It's not a given that if you just sit on your hands that you're going to not share in the blame when there's something you could have done to fix it. And Democrats have long said, accurately, legitimately, and morally, that government shutdowns are bad. It affects people. People people who work for the federal government lose pay. People who rely on government services don't get them. It is disruptive. It's bad for the economy writ large. So they have reason to try to stop that from happening. Not to the point where they have to be beholden to unreasonable Republican demands. I mean, the reason why shutdowns are always unpopular for the party that instigates them is because
which is always Republicans, because they talk far more about how inefficient and how much the government should be shut down or reformed, own a shutdown whether or not they actually control the majorities in either the House or the Senate.
There's one time where Democrats were beginning to own one, and that was under Trump when they were fighting about Dreamers and the wall.
Yes.
And there was a very, very brief shutdown that Democrats essentially instigated. And the early numbers of it were bad, and they quickly pulled the plug on it.
Yeah.
And so it didn't leave any lasting damage. Nobody likes seeing. So you might take an issue like the Dreamers. Dreamers are popular.
Yes.
You can say this. I've taken the poll. People like Dreamers. Republicans under Obama might say polling says Obamacare is unpopular, so they're going to appreciate it if we want to repeal Obamacare. That poll number does not tell you that people want you to use that issue to take the government hostage and cause disruptions to the broader economy.
Yeah.
All evidence is people actually hate that. So you might be taking an issue that would otherwise be a good issue for you and make it an unpopular one by yoking it to a stupid strategy. So Democrats have to be very careful, and I think they largely are right now. I think it is wholly legitimate for Democrats to say, I will pass this bill to keep the government open with funding levels that we negotiate with the Republicans.
Yeah.
But there's got to be language in the bill that says the president has to honor these numbers. Otherwise, what am I voting for? If this paper isn't what it's printed on, is worth what it's printed on, because the president can do whatever he wants with it, why am I negotiating with you? Yeah. That to me is like a legitimate. I mean, Republicans have said that's a non-starter. I think Democrats could plant the flag there. And
they
not
could go
take
out.
the blame.
They can go out and talk about that, and then when it falls apart, you can say, "Well, it fell apart because of this."
Right, exactly. I think they'd be on firm ground there. Whereas if they said Republicans have to shelve their planned Medicaid cuts, which is going to be in a separate bill, it's supposed to be in the reconciliation bill, they have to pull the plug on that, or else we don't keep the government open. Look, I think Republicans are on very thin ice with Medicaid cuts. Yeah, but I would not yoke it to the shutdown battle, because that would take a popular issue and turn into an unpopular issue.
So you think that a messaging around a shutdown is crucial, because you don't want the Democrats would not be wise to say, yes, we shut down the government because we need X, Y, and Z.
Correct. I would not be. They should be very consistent in saying we do not want a government shutdown. We do not need a government shutdown. We have a very reasonable proposal that's bipartisan to prevent a government shutdown. We just need that agreement to be honored by the president to vote for it. And if he can't do that, if Republicans want a system where the president gets to decide how much money is spent and what Congress does is irrelevant, then go pass that bill yourself. Yeah. Go do that in a reconciliation bill and do it yourself. You have the power to do that. You're welcome to do it. But if you want us on it, then we need to know the numbers we're negotiating are going to be honored by the president.
Do you think we're going to get a shutdown?
Yeah.
Do you think that the Democrats are going to listen to your advice?
I mean, that seems to be where I think they didn't quite use my wording there. There was an initial float by Minority Leader Jeffries about the Medicaid part, which I have not seen him double down on, and have talked more about what I've just talked about in terms of make sure the numbers are honored by the president. So we'll see. But so they may take my advice there, or they may or not. That's my advice. I may just be doing it organically. Yeah. But I think that's going to, if Republicans are not, if they're calling that a non-starter, it's really hard for Democrats to accept a bill that Trump can just throw in the trash.
This is the clean CR, right?
Yeah,
Or
to have a clean
whatever,
CR.
whatever.
I mean, look, I think I would not be mad at Democrats if they accepted some kind of spending cut, not a Doge level spending cut, but like some kind of trim in that bill, so long as Trump was going to honor it and say, look, I understand we're in the minority or the majority, you want some cuts, we gotta meet in the middle. But the numbers gotta mean something, otherwise what's the point?
I wonder where the conversations are right now on the Hill with the Democrats, because there is this frustration with elected Democrats that the approval numbers are pretty bleak, and there is a frustration that they should do something. They should shake something up. They should, I can understand where some of the voices saying we need to shut things down because this is out of control, and we need to show that there is some teeth to a Democratic argument. If I squint, I can see their short-term goal, but I tend to agree with you that it would be a pretty big change from orthodoxy in terms of messaging that government shutdowns are bad because they're harmful.
Yeah, I mean, I think Democrats are going to say they're never going to cheer a shutdown. And if there's a shutdown, they will try to blame it on Republicans. The question is, how credible will that blame affixing be?
Yeah.
If you're making demands that go beyond what is reasonable to have in this bill, you risk taking the blame. And it's a pretty fine line. I'm making, it's a speculative argument that I'm making. I think it's a reasonable argument to say we want to keep the government open. The numbers in the bill to keep the government open have to be honored by the president. I don't think that's going to sound like it is making something. I have some ideological wish list demand that I'm trying to impose on the other party unwillingly, using the government as my hostage-taking device. I don't think honoring the numbers in the bill reaches that level.
Well, we will all see. All this is happening so fast. So, we have tariffs on Monday, the announcement on Monday. Trump speaks to Congress tonight as we record this, and then this shutdown is happening probably either next week or the week after. I forget which. My math isn't fantastic, but it's gonna be boom, boom, boom. But you'll be able to read all about it and so many other things by way of Mr. Bill Scher. Where can people find your work?
Washington Monthly. I'm politics editor of the Washington Monthly, WashingtonMonthly.com. Both on the website. We have a newsletter on Substack and through email, which you can subscribe to on our website. I'm mostly posting on Blue Sky these days for my social media activity. BillScher.bsky.social, and Washington Monthly is WashingtonMonthly.com on Blue Sky.
There we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
This is your update brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's where you need to go if you want to get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. And you want to know what? We're going to give you guys free HBO week this week. We're going to give you free HBO week. We did our bonus episode, went out to the masses because it was all on that Ukraine blow up in the White House. I knew it had to get out because, look, if I would have waited, it would have been over. It wouldn't have mattered. Had to do it. So free HBO week there. And if we're not going to cover the fake State of the Union on this episode, you guys will get the Thursday episode as well, in case something crazy happens. But the paying people will get it first. We're gonna put it out for paying people, and then it'll be out a little bit later for the free folks. But hopefully you get to understand what this life is like. The idea that you get 4 episodes of this show, that you never miss a morsel of news. That's the whole point. That's why they do free HBO week when they're debuting a series. You get one episode of White Lotus and you're like, what are they going to get up to in Thailand? What's with these toxic white women? What about the family that is from the Carolinas? I saw Arnold's son's butt, but what next? That's why you go ahead and subscribe. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. I really like the White Lotus season, by the way. White Lotus, Severance, Righteous Gemstones is back, Daredevil's back. Oh my Lord, we got good stuff happening. All right, let's get back to political news. J.D. Vance sparked controversy after mocking Europe's proposal to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine, describing it dismissively as involving some random country without recent war experience. Although Vance denied he was referring specifically to Britain or France, his remarks drew immediate criticism from both nations, given their leadership in proposing the plan. Politicians in the UK condemned his comments as disrespectful, including Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage bashed him. He's with the Reform Party in the UK, seen as their farthest to far right. And it highlights significant British sacrifices alongside U.S. forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. French military officials similarly emphasized their troops' bravery and sacrifices. Vance, who did say he was not referring to either of those two countries, he's been critical of European involvement in Ukraine, suggesting economic cooperation with American workers as a superior security guarantee compared to the peacekeeping forces. Obviously, look, there's a little bit of telephone with this. It also comes at a very odd moment where, there was a 72-hour period after that Oval Office blow up where we were talking about a world in which the United States and Ukraine would go their separate ways. That is no longer the case. The mineral deal is signed, so this probably matters a little bit less. But also, the mineral deal is something that is part of... Look, Starmer and Macron came to the U.S. so they could tell the United States to sign that deal because they want that deal there so they can feel comfortable putting peacekeeping troops in because they want the United States to have a skin in the game for the future of Ukraine. Again, it's like if Ukraine is to exist, the United States wants the guarantor on that contract to continue to be in control of the mines that they are investing in, right? But it does highlight something, which is that, it's very popular for foreign leaders to be very critical of the United States right now. That is something that is very, very popular. Even for the far right, even for Poilievre, even for Farage. These are people that otherwise might go to CPAC. And now they're mad. Republican efforts to pass a government funding bill at current spending levels are facing significant internal challenges, risking both a shutdown and a broader GOP budget intended to advance President Trump's agenda. Hardline conservatives like Representative Chip Roy warn that if Republicans abandon plans to maintain flat funding, fiscal hawks will insist on deeper mandatory spending cuts to programs like Medicaid and SNAP. The conflict emerges as GOP leaders facing Democratic opposition try to rally near unanimous Republican support for a stopgap bill to keep current funding levels through September. If the GOP fails to pass this long-term funding measure, leaders might be forced into bipartisan negotiations for higher spending levels, angering conservatives. Democrats argue Republicans are responsible for a potential shutdown, urging a short-term stopgap to allow time for negotiations. Meanwhile, Trump's administration is lobbying hardline Republicans directly, emphasizing the need to avoid a shutdown and pass a bill aligning with his policy priorities. The tensions highlight the internal divisions within the Republican Party between moderates wary of drastic cuts and conservatives pushing fiscal austerity, threatening the legislative path for Trump's big, beautiful bill Speaking of a beautiful bill, we just spoke with Bill Scher talking about the Democratic side of the shutdown negotiations, which as soon as we are done with the Ukraine mineral deal, we'll see if we have any movement on the tariffs. You know, that'll be the next crisis that we have to deal with, is the shutdown next week. And finally, Democratic lawmakers are discussing a litany of options to protest at President Trump's speech to Congress on Tuesday. So if you're listening to this Wednesday, this might be foreshadowing, including outright disruption. Now, I just want to read to you, this is from Axios, a list of props that Democrats are considering bringing. So if you've already watched this speech, you already know what happened. This is what they thought about bringing. You could just go simple, like what Rashida Tlaib brought, a sign, a hand sign that like what Tlaib brought to Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to Congress. That one just said war criminal. Some are considering bringing eggs or empty egg cartons to highlight how expensive eggs are. A pocket constitution to point out how Trump has violated the Constitution. We're at the point in our political alignment that Democrats want to bring pocket constitutions to Congress. Boy, I never thought I'd see the day. Also, hand clappers, red cards, and other various props. Some are also considering walking out. This obviously follows Republicans can't really complain about this at all. You know, we go all the way back to 2009. You have Republican Joe Wilson shouting, "You lie," at Obama. That was shocking at the time. Obviously, you have different levels of hooting and hollering. In Biden's State of the Union address last year, Marjorie Taylor Greene shouted the name Laken Riley at President Biden, who took the bait and talked about it. But Democrats are fired up. This is what I wanted to get out of Bill. There's a very big do something contingent amongst the Democratic mainstream. And we'll see if it manifests itself in proactive action in this State of the Union. TakePoliticsSeriously.com is where you need to go if you want to sign up. You want to know what? Just do it now. Like, I'm going to give you the State of the Union episode. That's normally a bonus. I'm going to give it to you. But just get it early. You know, I might even try to do this sumbitch in the morning. Just try to get it out ASAP. And then have it come out later or Thursday. So you might just be able to get, boom, boom, 2 episodes. You know, possible. Just go ahead and sign up. Just sign up. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That is 2 bonus episodes each and every week. And now, Katie Harbath. I'd like to welcome to the show, making her PX3 debut, Katie Harbath. We had the privilege of meeting at a Substack get-together in D.C., and we were talking about social media and your experience with Facebook and everything that came before. So first, welcome to the show. And second, for the audience, please go ahead and tell your story.
Thanks. And thanks for having me. I'm really excited to do this. So my name's Katie Harbath. I am originally from Green Bay, Wisconsin, Midwesterner who moved to DC in 2003 at the very beginning of the internet and sort of social media age in politics. And so very beginning. So I had my first job in at the Republican National Committee I was just a comms assistant, but I wrote a memo to all my bosses about all this stuff I thought we should be doing online. And this is back when it was called e-campaigning. And so I ended up spending the first part of 2000s through the 2010 election running digital campaigns for various Republican offices, organizations, stuff like that. And then I spent 10 years at Facebook. I was originally recruited to help get Republicans to be using Facebook pages. And then that turned into me pitching after the Obama's 2012 win. We had a lot of interest from international parties and politicians about how they could use the internet in the same way that President Obama had done. And so we started building out the international elections team, which I ran from 2013 to the end of 2019. So it was a really slow period of time. There wasn't anything crazy that happened during that time. It was quite boring. But I was there as we were trying to figure out, initially it was trying to figure out like doing election day reminders, stuff like that. And then after the 2016 election shifted into everything from political ad transparency to the information environment, fact checking, how you deal with politicians online, so many things we continue to talk about today. And then I left the company after 10 years in 2021. I'm actually coming up on that anniversary and went out on my own. And I started doing consulting. I started a newsletter called Anchor Change, which is the one on Substack. I started that 2 weeks before Frances Haugen dropped all of her documents in the Wall Street Journal.
Good time.
And stuff. So it was good timing as a lot of people were trying to understand what was this? What was she releasing? What did this stuff mean? Because a lot of it had to do with the work that I had worked on. And so I now split my time still focusing on technology and democracy and politics, both internationally and here at home, but working with both nonprofits and companies and all of this work.
Well, there's obviously a lot there, and we want to get to as much of it in this interview as we can. But because I am a total nerd, I want to go back to the very early days, because that is something that I very much vividly remember. If we're talking about 2004, for folks who have even been around this for a little bit, I mean, obviously we are pre-Obama, totally reshifting everything with 2008, back when data mining was super cool and awesome before it became dangerous and despicable later. And we're even pre, like Ron Paul's money bomb and stuff like that. The person
it was
that
Howard
I remember,
Dean money bomb type
Howard
stuff.
Dean, yeah. So that was, I remember McCain leveraged the internet in the 2000 primary in a way that was unique.
Yeah, he had some of the first truly online donations because
yes.
E-commerce, like Bob Dole's campaign had tried some of it in 96 and stuff like that, but the e-commerce infrastructure wasn't there.
Just wasn't there,
so,
yeah.
McCain 2000. In fact, a woman that I worked with, Becky Donatelli, her claim is that the first truly online donation was to George Pataki in 1998.
Oh, wow. Now we're talking. You love it. You love it when we can drop a Pataki reference here on the show. Yeah, I remember. In fact, I think it might be my first and last earnest political donation was when I was a teenager watching that primary, that George W. Bush, John McCain primary in 2000. And I donated like $10 or whatever to John McCain's online portal, and then got a T-shirt in return that had a hand-addressed stamped envelope from their office. But it shows you how far we have come, as now all of this is mechanized within an inch of its life. So at that point, when you're on the Republican side trying to pitch to candidates and stuff on how to just use the internet in what they are doing, what are those conversations like? What are the pushback, and who are the candidates and campaigns and causes that were like, yeah, hell yeah, let's get all in on this?
Yeah, so during the reelect, I would say, it was very focused on email acquisition. Micro-targeting was a huge thing. Like Republicans had actually were seen as the innovators in micro-targeting and using it to combine. They weren't necessarily doing it online, but they were combining consumer data with voter data to then decide what,
like magazine lists and stuff like that.
Magazine lists. Yeah. And so then you're advertising on the Hallmark Channel versus NBC broadcast because it's a lot cheaper and like all of that kind of stuff. And so, we were doing some web videos. I was doing a lot of microsites. We did one like Carry on Iraq. There was one called Flipper Cam, which was trying to highlight how John Kerry was a flip-flop. But initially it was very much just like, what earned media could we get? Because you could get a lot of earned media by look at these guys doing these new cool tech things with all of that. where the conversation started to get interesting because it was still kind of seen as a novelty type thing. The things, it was what happened after '04 where the conversations got interesting, because two things happened that made people be like, oh, I got to pay attention to this. One was the bloggers in 2004 going after Dan Rather for the fake documents around President Bush and his National Guard service.
If I remember correctly, was one of the
That
big
was
ones.
one. So a lot of the bloggers that we talk about today were around then too. So Powerline blog, Hugh Hewitt was big around then. A lot of those folks who had like started to. And it was kind of seen by a lot of folks.
That was all post Drudge, like post '98. Drudge explodes everything with Lewinsky, and then all of a sudden the internet now has a seat at the table.
And you have Blogspot has come on. So it's like, Blogspot is like the very early day precursor to what Substack is today, right? Like in my mind, because I had a Blogspot blog. It was great. I kind of used it as almost like early Twitter. I was just posting my musings on it and stuff like that. So the infrastructure was there to make it easier for people. WordPress, all those things. And so that happens. And now folks are like, oh, wait, we can like push stuff through bloggers that can actually get press attention, right? It was still kind of that media focused type thing, but I could also become a target. And so it's sort of like, oh, I got to cultivate these relationships. The other thing was YouTube coming on the scene in 2005, 2006, and George Allen getting caught by a tracker who is somebody with a video, like old school video camera. Macaca. And so all of a sudden, George Allen, who was seen as a potential presidential candidate, now his political career was ruined from that.
For those, we're running through a lot of like deep.
We're
lore
going
here,
real deep stuff.
So let's just stop. That was a early internet video. It's funny, I don't even associate that with YouTube, but I assume it certainly lines up more with that. That somebody that was there recording every event, which at that point was aggressive. Now it is just something that you assume everything that you go out and speak is going to be recorded and immediately editable and put up online. He called out the guy recording and called him macaca, which was a monkey, if I remember correctly, and the guy was I don't know if he was African American. I think he was just, if memory serves,
I can't remember what
had a darker
race he
anyway.
was. Yeah,
this was, but at that time, you know, if we think of it in these kinds of moments that were. At times far apart, you have Lewinsky, which obviously is its own gigantic thing, but that is really just Matt Drudge posting one page of HTML and then the rest of it just kind of goes insane. From there, it's still a major media story. And then you have Dan Rather, where it was the speed of that. It was how fast that was debunked on the internet that Dan Rather runs a segment saying that George W. Bush dodged the draft and has the goods, has the documents to prove it. The documents suck. They're not real. It's disproven by the internet in like 72 hours. And that's what was different. What was different was that now when the proof hit the internet, things went fast. Like it went within like weeks. And then you get to these micro things like this George Allen thing, which I had totally forgotten, where that really is probably the first time that I remember something happening the majority on the internet. Like there was coverage of it, but we weren't in a political time where a politics story like that saturated mainstream news. It was like in the political world that was a thing. And now there was a 24/7 home for that online.
Yeah. And it was a way for them to, rather than the opposing campaign to have to like send a videotape to a reporter, right? Or anything like that, they could upload it to YouTube. And not only could they then send that to reporters, but everybody could see it.
Everybody.
And everybody could
all
cover
the comments it. And
And by the way, part of the reason I have all these details is I'm writing an entire book about, it's called Disrupting Politics, and I just finished the first draft that goes through my story.
I need it. I need it immediately. Yeah. This is like very much my wheelhouse.
And it's so fascinating. So to your question though about like what were those conversations like? Well, now I'm getting a combination. There's some people being like they're leaning in. I was doing some of my first trainings in Congress in 2005, 2006, which is like who's a blogger? How do you engage with them? We were doing things like Blogger Row now, and like you were starting to include them in like different stuff like that. You still had members who are like, why am I talking to a guy who's in his basement and is just talking about his lunch? And it's like, no, it's a bit more than that. And so you had, but what I found was that as members of the House of Representatives usually got on board first because they're in election every 2 years. Yeah. With senators and governors, it usually took until they were up for re-election. And then their teams were like, you got to be on these. You got to be on these sites.
You got to do something. Yeah. You have to talk to these like people. Or you got to be on these platforms.
And it's a way for you to like, if you're upset with how the media is covering you, well, just go on there and tell people yourself. Like you now have a direct voice to people. And so, but then there was a lot of like, you know, people were trying to just do their same old press releases, but putting it to social media. So there was a lot of conversations. And this happened over many years. This was not a like all of a sudden overnight type of thing. Like you had other like moments. You had Culberson going live on the House floor for the first time using like an old flip camera or there were these cameras back then that were like specifically
Flips.
To go live.
Yes.
Yeah, before you had iPhones. Like
Yeah.
And they shut down the C-SPAN cameras because I think the government was shut down or something like that, and House Republicans were mad, so he went live from the House floor. On that, you had different moments like that started to show other members of being like, oh, this thing can actually be quite powerful. And then I think it was really the 2010 cycle and the Tea Party movement and stuff like that. Yeah. And Obama. So you had Obama 08, which was like today, if we want to like compare it to today, what I view what AI was to the 2024 election, to last year's election, to me is what social media was to 08. And then you think about how much that grew in just 4 years.
I mean, and you know, you were talking about how Republicans were seen as having the more sophisticated data tracking and micro targeting for voters. That 08 election almost entirely erases whatever perceived advantage that was in terms of micro targeting, and if anything puts Democrats ahead in a lead that at least on some online and digital platforms they kind of still maintain between the two parties.
Well, I have a theory on all this if you will indulge me.
This is why I knew immediately we'd get along.
So my theory on this is that you really it both depends on the candidate and the campaign manager in terms of having an innovator's mindset versus an I know everything mindset. So with this is that with President Bush's 04 campaign, even though he was running a reelect, Karl Rove, Ken Millman, Ed Gillespie, and the president themselves, they were willing to take risks and try new things with the micro-targeting. Yeah. They had tested it out in 02, but they were willing to do a lot of that stuff in 04. There was a lot like, again, creating these web videos and stuff like that. They were just willing to try a lot of new things and take a different approach to it all. Whereas then what happened was, and this happens a lot when you win, is you're then like, I won with this. I know the winning strategy. I'm just going to keep doing what I did to win. Yeah. Whereas the Democrats were like, oh my God, we're so far behind. And they started investing in it, right? They started investing in the data infrastructure and all of those things. And it wasn't Hillary Clinton, who was an establishment candidate, who again thought she knew what she was doing. Her team thought they knew what they were doing. It was Obama, who was an underdog, who was willing to take could take more of those risks, who was willing to be more innovative. And do a lot of that. I worked on the Giuliani campaign when he was still known as America's mayor in 2007. I always feel like I got to remind people there was a different Giuliani back then. Oh, yeah. But he also...
A very interesting strategy to wait until Florida to start campaigning, which is kind of the legacy of that campaign.
It is. But also another one was, it was very challenging for me as a digital person because they had a target on their back right away. They didn't want to do much online because they were afraid about the backlash and things that would happen. And so Obama took advantage of that. Yeah. And then what was great was in his 2012 campaign, they were again willing to throw out the old playbook to do stuff different and everything, and do things and approach data and digital and social media in ways that nobody had before. And then you saw the same thing with Trump in 2016.
Yeah.
You had a whole bunch of Republican candidates who were very much, and their consultants and everything were like, I know what needs to be done. Whereas the Trump team was like, I'm going to make everyone compete. Y'all got to come in. Y'all got to try out your systems, and we'll see who wins and who does better. And then that's who we're going to give the contracts to, right? Like, they were just willing. And the same thing here in 24. They were willing to do stuff differently with the media and everything else like that. And so as we look at this ebb and flow that seems to happen between which party is seen as quote unquote ahead, I think when you look at the big picture, sometimes, especially here in the inside the Beltway, people tend to focus on the details versus kind of being like, oh, we need to make tweaks here, or we need our own Joe Rogan, or we need to do this. And that some of that's important. I'm not saying it's not. But I think we also need to zoom out and look at like the overall mindset of being willing to do things differently and take that high risk.
You know, it's funny. There was a back and forth. A Politico article came out over the last 72 hours talking about a big confab that happened.
I saw that
out in Virginia with a bunch of Democratic staffers that were talking about like what needed to happen, what needed to change. And Liz Smith, who of course ran Pete Buttigieg's campaign, is looked at as among the more savvy campaign managers in the up and coming, at the very least. She said, look, this is an epidemic on the Democratic side where you have a lot of people that believe the worst thing that can happen is a mistake. And the worst thing that can happen is bad press. And if you look at the rise of Trump, that to me is a lesson that's like, well, that is a decade out of date. Anybody who believes that you can't survive something that is universally condemned as bad or over the line or in bad taste, like, we're just in a faster perspective now. And that was one of the things that, you know, I did a podcast comparing the 1960 election of JFK to Trump's 2016 election, with the idea being that JFK really understood television, not in the way that we think of with the debate, but rather like he had a VCR before everybody else, and he was cutting tapes and sending them to news stations before anybody. Nobody had done that before. They invented that in the same way that Donald Trump invented being the S poster in chief. Like he was before he ran for office, he had strong opinions on the love lives of the Twilight cast, not because he had a natural affinity for werewolves and vampires, but because he really knew that that's what people were talking about. He knew what buzz was. He knew how to stay close to the flame, and he was able to do it whether or not people liked everything that he said. In fact, even his supporters don't like everything that he says, but they like the thing that they hear, and they bind to that and they walk forward. And that's, I think, what really was the difference in terms of candidates. What I've found interesting is that the Republicans still haven't been able to catch up on some of the other blocking and tackling stuff like fundraising, where Act Blue, I mean, I think there's probably another conversation that we could have about.
There is a whole conversation on online fundraising. Like, it's you and I, your listeners are going to be like, dear God, please, Katie and Justin, no. Like, or they're going to be the.
No, they're here for this. They're here for this. Like, this is the neckbeardiest like conversation that we can have. But they are here
such a
for
rant
it.
about that. Like, and it's like, and what I will say is that I think one of the mistakes that Democrats and Republicans have made over the last 2 decades is thinking that what works for each party is supposed to work for the other one.
Yes.
And I think that actually the way that folks consume information, want to donate, want to be involved, I think there's actually a lot of nuance there that needs to be. And I think sometimes we fall into this trap again of being like, I need exactly what the other side has without fully understanding what it is that the people you're trying to persuade need. And as somebody who's a swing voter, like I call myself a Republican with a pharmaceutical level disclaimer underneath it of what kind of Republican I am, because
you have strummy guitar music as somebody.
I kind of need it, and like
your...
speak very loudly of like, I worked for Giuliani when he was America's mayor. I didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016 or 2020 or 2024, but I did vote for Glenn Youngkin. Like, you know what I mean? Like I kind of that kind of thing. And by the way, I didn't go through all that fast, everyone, just to try to gloss over it. It was more of the pharmaceutical disclaimer thing. But I remember once talking to actually a candidate here in Virginia who I actually, in person, he was like, well, why didn't you vote for me? And I go, actually, sir, I don't ever remember seeing any of your ads. I don't remember ever getting outreach from you. Yeah. And we started talking, and I feel bad because I probably made somebody on his campaign's life a living hell that night. Because he goes, oh, are you one of those cord cutters? And I'm like, yeah, I have been since 2014. Yeah. And he goes, oh, we did all broadcast. And I was like, yeah. I'm completely online. Like, yeah. And I'm a swing voter, and I'm just shocked at who I get outreach from and who I don't get outreach from on these types of things, and how candidates
by the way,
are choosing.
That's something that was even a huge deal in this election. You know, I was listening to an interview with I think it was on the Ruthless podcast that does, you know, they're all Republican.
Oh, I love them. They're great.
Yeah, It's a great show. And I would say, even if you're not a conservative,
listen to them.
When they go into like the nuts and bolts of stuff, there's a lot of really good information on.
Yeah, I've known those guys since the early 2000s. So there we go. They're my go-to podcast to get a sense of what's happening on the right. Particularly, like you said, the nuts and bolts and stuff. But they
were talking about, you know, this was cord cutting, that now there's not a single place where you can reliably hit everybody. Broadcast is gone, newspapers are gone, radio's gone, everybody's scattered to the winds. You got to figure out where your audience is, where the persuadable but yet unpersuaded audience is. And they were telling a story of they had bought out a lot of over-the-top ads for the Olympics because they're like, this is the best. Everybody's watching on Peacock or I think it was, the NBC stuff on Tubi, like just wherever the Olympics were, we want a Donald Trump coming out of Air Force One ad in the middle of an American athlete winning the gold medal. That's what they wanted. And then they noticed that 2 days after the Olympics started, all of a sudden you have all of this Democratic ad inventory that's hitting, but they know that the ad rates that they are paying for that are way higher than what they paid before, because one side gave a crap about understanding where cord cutters were, and the other had to wait until they themselves as cord cutters were only seeing Trump ads, and somebody got on the phone and ripped somebody a new one and said, for the love of God, can we please get our ads on this inventory? Which is like, I think that's just going to be the reality from here on out, because I don't think that we're getting anything monocultural in a way that's controllable or buyable for the rest of our lifetime.
No, I don't think so, though. I am paying a lot of attention to how AI will change how we organize and summarize all of those different things. So it won't be monoculture anymore. It'll still be very individualized, but it will be delivered to us in different ways that I think will change the incentives for the people creating the content, including politicians. That I don't fully know yet how that's exactly going to shape, to play out over the coming years. But I think that how we see candidates approaching 2028 in the information environment is just going to be vastly different than what we saw in 24. I think we will see there will be elements that are the same. That always happens. But I do think that depending upon where these platforms are, what types of content people are consuming and how they're consuming it is going to continue to be important.
It's one of those things that I compare where we are with AI now to, like, I think we're still in like 96 or 97 with the internet, where there's enough to know. Yeah. There are people that are building companies that will last for decades. Bezos is building Amazon. Like there are players here. There are Yahoo is here, Alta Vista is here. There's elements of search. We kind of know the general through lines of, I think, the first 5 years, 10 years, but things are moving so fast. The technology is moving.
I was going to say it's going to be accelerated though, right? Like it's not going to be, So like you're going to go, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I just think it is going to go fast because we've learned we now know what the first 25 years of the internet were. So it's like, now we at least have a template of like, okay, well, and we've even seen it. It's like, now we want AI search. Now we want AI, nobody's figured out a great way to do it with email, but we want it with email. All the things that we wanted to do with the internet immediately, that's like the first thing that we want to do with AI. But the real revolution is going to come as we figure out the other ways to do it. The things that we haven't thought of, the things that don't have a blueprint for them. And they're going to come quick, and they're going to hit really, really fast.
Well, and I think we're going to see some of that here in the midterms, right? I think we've already seen some of that internationally, and we'll be paying close attention. Australia's elections coming up soon. Canada will have elections this year, and you tend to have American consultants that tend to go work on those, and you can start to see some of those trial and errors and things that they're trying out for there that will, and then I think we'll see a big acceleration, between 2027 and 2028. I think there will be technology that we talk about being crucial to whoever won the 28 election that doesn't exist at the beginning of 27.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly possible, really, and you would know this better than I would. My only question is whether or not somebody's really going to put, the rocket fuel into it and try to do it, because it usually feels like, these things take a few cycles before somebody really realizes, oh, no, this is it.
Well, it doesn't also have to be that huge. So the reason I say that is I think about custom audiences for Facebook. This was where campaigns or any advertiser could upload an email list. It was double blind hash, but basically, if you uploaded email list of 1,000 names, it would tell you, okay, we matched 800. You can now advertise to those people, and you can use our additional targeting on top of that. That didn't come out until the beginning of 2012, and that was something that was used quite a bit by, quite a bit by the Obama campaign and the Romney campaign too. So there's not just how the campaigns are utilizing it, but what things do the platforms come out with, even if they're not specifically about politics, but what do they come out with that ends up being a big thing for that election? Live streaming in 2015 and 2016, I think, is another great example.
Yeah. And I wonder what that's going to be for AI, because I do think that, AI itself, the tools are coming out so much faster than anybody is making applications that can break through to the mainstream. And, that's one of the biggest gulfs that I see from it as a technology, is that when you look at the capabilities of something like, OpenAI released ChatGPT 4.5, and that is a model for which has like an emotional intelligence, the likes of which we've never seen, that's probably going to be an underpinning of things like campaign organization or outreach. You could very much see applications there, although it's very expensive right now. It'll get cheaper. But on the other hand, the biggest way that people understand AI right now are either commercials or features that they actively ignore because they suck. It's like all the commercials are for Apple and Google for people. It's like, hey, be a dead-eyed sociopath who like is bad at their job and has no emotional connections, but use AI to pretend that you are a human in a way that nobody really connects to. But it doesn't mean that the tech isn't amazing. The tech is. People just haven't figured out the application.
So this is what takes me back to the early 2000s and social media. So I am starting to get a lot more from people in the last couple of months, whereas all of last year was sort of about the fears of AI. Mm-hmm. Now I'm getting a lot more people being like, can you teach me how you use ChatGPT?
Yes.
Right. Can you tell me, like, what's a prompt? Like, how do I do this? Like, what does that look like? And it's like, so there's this realization that this thing's here to stay. This is that it's going to be something that could take your job, needs to be something that you need to be up to speed on. And so it is still very beginner. These tools have a long way to go, but so did social media back in the day when everybody was still learning how to use those. And so I think a lot about these parallels and like kind of what can we learn from that social media age as we're kind of going into this AI one.
I could not agree more. And that was, even down to the idea that social media was very much thought of as just frivolous. This was, obviously Facebook comes out of a bunch of, a way to post party pictures and connect to the person that you met at the bar last night. And then all of a sudden it becomes this bedrock way that people are communicating. I'll tell you what, I feel like I kind of want to save the big conversation of the grand kind of like demonization of social media for another time to bring you back on, because I feel like it deserves more time than we have.
Oh, that also deserves. Well, how about this? Like, when my book comes out next year or like sometime, like I've got all sorts of stuff in there about that time period too. And so maybe we can chat then.
I guess maybe let me ask you this then. Like, what was the biggest moment where you felt that there was a culture shift? Did it happen before 2016 where people were looking at social media and saying like, oh, wait, is this bad? Do we not like this? It was only a few years ago that Obama's bragging about all the data that they can use and how they can target people to their very home. And then all of a sudden it becomes, by the time we get to Cambridge Analytica, it's Frankenstein's monster that's, being chased around with pitchforks and torches.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, actually, because so the date that immediately comes to mind for me is May 9th, 2016. But there are tremors before that, and there's a lot of like afterquakes after that date. But the reason I picked that date is that was the date of the Philippines election in 2016 when Rodrigo Duterte won. And this is one where many people may know the name Maria Ressa, who won the Nobel Prize a few years ago, is a journalist who's been attacked a lot by the Duterte campaign. She built an entire company called Rappler off of Facebook in order to hold her government to account. And she's taken a lot of risks in doing that, and has really been a push in terms of like truth on the internet and stuff like that. But so that was one of the first, because then a month later you had Brexit, and then you kind of had the Trump team. But then that was also the date of trending topics. So this was a controversy for Facebook, where Gizmodo ran a story about a contractor accusing the company of suppressing conservative content on the platform. Now, conservatives, this could be a whole other show, the story of conservatives and tech. And that entire journey is a journey that goes back to the 90s, to the early 2000s. Oh, God.
AM radio. Like conservatives tend to find a media that they colonize and they want to own and have outside.
Well, and there was a lot of challenges. There was the Google bombing in 2003. There was Obama. Like there's a lot to unpack there. But that there was always these undercurrents of sort of conservatives being frustrated with the tech industry and Silicon Valley. And this sort of blew that out in the open, that I think led to many of the things that we talk about today. Jim Jordan, censorship, Trump, the tech CEOs being there at the inauguration, like all of that to me kind of
long, strange trip. Yeah.
And before that, because you had Brexit a month later, you had the Trump win. Yep. Then you had Russian ads being found in the fall of 2017, and then you had Cambridge Analytica in March of 2018, right? The Cambridge Analytica story actually came out of a decision Mark made in 2010 where they were being criticized for holding close too much data, and they created something called Open Graph.
Yep.
And you had researchers and stuff, and that was actually shut down in 2014, 2015, because then people were starting to be like, oh, this is like a little creepy, too much data out there, stuff like that. And so it's hard to pinpoint. There's single moments like May 9th that like stick out to me, but it's really a bit of a death of a thousand cuts, and companies trying to react to certain criticisms they're getting without people thinking about the unintended consequences that come from those decisions that could then seem like a good idea at the time. 8 years later, and even today, most people know the words Cambridge Analytica, even though their data was shit. Like,
it sucked. That was the other thing. That just blew my mind, is that it's like there was nothing that Cambridge Analytica had that a guy selling rubber dog poop drop shipping out of Hong Kong could not have had. Like this was not the villainous spell that was cast over Britain that caused Brexit.
But people wanted that, right? People wanted, they were still reeling out of the Trump when they were reeling out of Brexit. They were looking for the easy answer. Yeah. And Cambridge Analytica just was that made for TV kind of wrapping for people.
Even with a British villain.
Yes. It had everything, right?
Yeah.
And so you couldn't, And it gave people something because to think about the scale of the internet, the fragmentation that's happening, it's just hard for any of us to get our heads wrapped around that. And so this goes back to sort of the importance of like this storytelling and this stuff that shapes how we think about these technologies, these tools, how the companies themselves think about building them and what they're doing, and why that's so important to keep in mind as we listen to these stories and things that we're being fed today.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to get you out of here because I want to respect your time, because I want to have you back on more often, because this is the kind of stuff that I just can talk about endlessly. But I want to talk about your Substack real quick. Where can people find it, and what do you write about?
Yeah, so I'm at acrechange.substack.com. I write primarily about tech and politics, both here in the U.S. and at home, sort of the trends I'm seeing, analysis, stuff like that. But then I also write a lot about career stuff, like how I built my business, how I think about how I'm approaching my career, how I'm approaching my writing, stuff like that. There's sadly, a lot of people have been laid off in both the tech industry and in the federal government at the moment, folks that I've worked with, and people are currently trying to figure out what's next. And so I've been trying to write a little bit about my own process so that hopefully it can help people to give them some ideas, or at least help them to feel like they're not alone.
Absolutely. All right. I know that based on this conversation, you're going to get a lot of people from this show that are going to want to follow you, because you have a great insight, and certainly you are at an amazing point in history that is certainly worthy of probably the book you're writing and many more. Katie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics, written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio. This show was edited by Will Saddleberg. You can email me, theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Our social media is Justin R. Young on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. And Politics, you can get our full video episodes on YouTube. Support us with a one-time donation, paypal.me/payjury. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Cash App is PX3Cash. You can send anything you'd like to me in the mail. Post Office Box 153184, Austin, Texas 78715. The only way you get our bonus content, however, is TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Paying members get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. That's $3 a week, or $99 for the entire year. That's 150 episodes of PX3 for under $99. What are we talking about? Come on. 150 episodes of the show for under $100. What are we doing? What are we even doing here? But of course, our founding tier gets your name read on the show at the end of the podcast, like these fine folks in the Titanic founding tier. L3PO, Peepaw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Sarah Jeannie, Jeremy, Pro Idiot, Chiller Tomatoes, Oh Yeah, It's Adam, Neil, AB Puppy, Dr. Whiskey, Michael, Fat Tony Speed J's from New York, Will, The Borge B, Matthew, Matt, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Andrew, Phil, Edison, Devon, Paul, A Dog Named Checkers, Gloria, my mom, Jerry, Trucker, John, Berkeley, Steven, and Zombie Doc. You want your name read on the show? Only one place to do it. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. At any moment, if you are a subscriber, you can always upgrade to founding. It's a good time. On Friday's free edition of the show, you are going to get J.D. Durkin talking about the state of the American economy and how Wall Street is reacting to the tariffs. God knows where we will be then. Someone might throw an egg at President Trump. Who knows? But I'll be there with you, because you guys are going to get the State of the Union reaction episode for free. It's free HBO week. Till next time, this is your old pal Justin Robert Young saying, some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss all three.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show Audio.